Hey everybody, my name is JJ Asghar, and we're here to talk about migrating a monolith to cloud native and the stumbling blocks you don't know about. Yes, first of all, I really do have the email address of awesome@ibm.com. If you know anything about IBM, that's really impressive. And actually last week I got awesome@redhat.com too, which is kind of fun. I'm a developer advocate. I don't know what that means anymore either. Because developer advocacy means things to different people, and you can find me more or less everywhere. JJ Asghar at JJ Asghar. I moved over to Blue Sky like the rest of tech Twitter, so I'm starting to show up there too. So you're more than willing to do it. Before I do this though, I do need to actually have get a reason to be here. So if you wouldn't mind taking a QR code real quick, take a picture of this QR code and go to that website. It'll literally hit a number count so I can go back to my boss to prove that I actually did a talk in front of people. It's about AI, because that's actually what I focus on now. Something called the Granite model. If you want to talk about an actual secure, truly open source model that is not like our major competitors done by IBM, and we will put our lawyers into court for you if you are using it, which ChatGPT, Gemini, all them will not do, but IBM will. That is something that could be very interesting to you if you want more information about it. I will say though, there's a lot more there, and that's what I do day in and day out, but we're not going to be talking about AI, we're going to be talking about cloud native. So first thing first, who believes they are cloud native right now? You don't count. Who still deals in the monolith in general? Okay, cool. So you're in the right room. And I do have a little saying here, which I'll start, which is, so your company has finally decided to move to cloud native. You've landed on containerization as your first step. You heard all you need to do was containerize your app and then push it to Kubernetes, OpenShift, or Nomad, or whatever, and the savings will just come. You've done this, and well, things haven't gone the way you planned, right? Like, some of the tech didn't do what you were expecting, which is weird. And what do you mean OpEx has gone up? Why is this thing so much more expensive now? Simply said, the promise of containerization or migrating to the cloud native ecosystem can be a lie if you don't do your homework. In this talk, I'm going to explain a few gotchas that a few enterprises under the guise of AsgharLabs went through while they were moving towards the cloud native world. And hopefully you'll learn from their mistakes. So when you start going down this path yourself, you won't have those same problems. I will say one of those enterprises is here in Dallas, or I guess we're in Plano, but we're here in Dallas, and they still have that problem, which is very interesting. But we can have a conversation at the social if you want. So what is AsgharLabs? AsgharLabs is a multinational tech conglomerate that bought hard into the VM ecosystem. They make ones and zeros better than anyone else in any other company. But in all seriousness, AsgharLabs is just the word I'm going to use instead of calling out that major airline company or that major car company that we all know exists here in Dallas. It's a fake company, and no, they're not hiring. That was supposed to be a joke, but nobody. Okay, there we go. Got a giggle. That's all I'm looking for. So what did AsgharLabs think they needed to do? They thought they just needed to take their migration from physical hardware or the data centers, co-location, to the VM ecosystem. Remember that whole movement back in the day when we had hardware and data centers and we were like, hey, that VMware thing's pretty cool now. It's not anymore. But there's a VMware thing. We can get more machines in there. Well, we already did that once. We can do that with containerization, right? Like that whole Kubernetes thing is just small VMs. Why not? Let's do it. Bare metal to VMs is the same as VMs to containers, right? Spoiler, it's not. So where do I come into these conversations normally, right? I come into this conversation when they've had a few, which I beg to differ, successful migrations. They're nowhere near where they thought they could be with the amount of time they've had. And I come into this like cloud native person who asks some simple but very hard questions that it seems that nobody ever asks. So let's ask those straightforward questions together and see where we can go. Believe it or not, it's shocking how many people don't actually know this. Who containerized your app? Like, was it the operations team? Was it the developer? Was there more than just a couple status meetings between each group of people doing the work? Like, when did y'all ship it? Who shipped it? Where did it come from? Like, you need to know what's going on. Until you have a working system, you need to know how that app was created and who containerized it. The next question is, why did you containerize this app, right? Like, was it because your CIO was in the plane and read the CIO magazine and thought it was the best thing to do? Or, were you trying to be next gen and not realizing it? You'd be amazed how many companies just don't know why they're going down this path. Like, it costs money to do this, right? And you need to understand, is it worth taking that engineering time? And we'll get to that in a little deeper later. Where do you plan on deploying your app, right? I've had so many conversations with different enterprises that don't actually have a plan around where they're going to deploy their application. There's this company that starts with an M and ends with a soft, that if you use some of their products, they give you a lot of free credits to run on their cloud, right? Which is pretty cool. If you're a CFO, you're like, hey, we can do as much as we want. Well, the first one's always free, right? But now you're all of a sudden tied into this ecosystem, and it turns out maybe you're trying to do something that one of the other major clouds is better at, but you've spent all this time and effort building this containerized system in their cloud, and the uplifting moving over to the other better products is going to cost you an insane amount of money. And people don't think about that when they start going down this path. So you got to figure out where you're going to deploy this stuff. And my favorite question, that you'd be shocked on how many people just don't fucking know. What did we actually containerize? Seriously, like, what did we do? Did we just take a Java app and shove it into the Java container and expect that a WAR file is just going to work in there, right? This comes down to the actual architecture of what we've containerized. AsgharLabs took, the one that I'm actually thinking of, which is a airline here in town, that took a WAR file. It could have actually been an EAR file, to be honest with you. And they thought they could just shove it in the Java Docker container and call it a day. This opened up so many conversations, right? Because when we start talking about how architectural changes happen with containers, you're putting a container inside of a container inside of a container in a running system. Like, it doesn't work that way because, again, containers aren't VMs. So let's look at some of the process that you're going to have to go through for architectural changes. This is where most companies think this is all they need to do, which is the replatform, right? Of course, I work for IBM, so, WebSphere has to be somewhere on here. That's a joke. Nobody's laughing. That's cool. But anyway, this is where most companies actually think as far they need to go. They just be like, take the thing, shove it in there, and go. But that's not true, right? Because there's a process to get to microservices, which is what containerization is designed to do. As you see, when you start taking and replatforming and putting it actually on the container, now you have to split out your processes, right? Because you have those two WAR files. Again, I work at IBM, so I have Java on here for a reason. I don't write Java, though, which is the funny part. You take the two WebSphere WAR files, you run it inside of that migrated app, and then as you see, you have like IBM MQ down there. So now you have the opportunity for all these microservices to start talking to one another, which is good. And then finally, you come to the strangler pattern, right? Where if you don't know what the strangler pattern is, it's when you start cutting down your monolithic app into smaller and smaller pieces. So now all of a sudden you have little functions that do all the little bits of work, which is really, really advantageous because it allows your people to focus on specifically that ecosystem or that feature instead of the whole app, which also means you can release that quicker, which means you can get to market faster, which is one of the main architectural advantages of this whole process, right? Is the ability to get real velocity out of this. Being able to focus on your own history for the different features instead of the whole history also allows people, with the developers in general, to have the situational awareness instead of having to know all the app and how everything talks to one another. Being able to focus on just a little bit allows you to work much better. But the problem on the disadvantage side of this is it requires a real level of high cooperation between teams, right? You have to build out advanced integration tests. You have to most likely have a completely different deployment system, which is really, really scary. Does everyone know what a CCB is? If I've heard that term, this must have been, I worked at Dell for a little while because I live in Austin. So So obviously, as living in Austin, you work at Dell at some point in your career. That was supposed to be a joke. The CCB was called the Change Control Board, right? Which is the group of people that would be like, hey, yes, we can release this thing. And I still remember this Change Control Board back when I was at Dell, where on Thursday at 4 o'clock, a bunch of senior VPs would come into a huddle room, which was like a room with 5 chairs around it, like a little small little thing. And they would literally do a thumbs up to release the code this weekend. And when I saw those thumbs up showing up, that means I was waking up at 3 in the fucking morning on Saturday to be able to release this code. Unfortunately, there's a lot of enterprises who do more or less that exact same thing today, right? They might not have everyone sit in the same room together, but they still need to go through all these. They need to talk to QA, they need to talk to the dev manager, they need to talk to the release manager, they need to talk to, all these people need to sign off to be released. That is very scary when you start moving into the microservices ecosystem or the cloud native ecosystem, because the whole point is it's supposed to give the power to the developers, which I'm at a developer conference, you know this, but you'd be shocked on how many people don't realize that this still stops people from doing the actual work. So you move all this way towards microservices and the ability to empower y'all, and then you still have your manager who's like, no, I need to see every single change that goes through. They might even not even be a technical manager, but they have to take that risk. So it's a cultural change that ends up happening along these lines. But wait, are we doubling up on things? So we decided to move down Kubernetes. And the Kubernetes has a load balancing side of it because we've got a bunch of microservices, right? That's exactly what it does. But our networking team has this F5 thing over here, right? So why do we need an F5 if our Kubernetes cluster does all the work for us? Or actually, it should be OpenShift. You should be using OpenShift because, Red Hat. Anyway, again, jokes are not landing at this at all. That's fine. But in all seriousness, yes, you probably will end up doubling up on things, right? Because you haven't done the audit to figure out what you could actually use or what you don't need to use. One of the great examples that I saw was actually the scheduler back to that WAR file. They had this Java stack where they were trying to spin out, when they ran batch jobs, they would spin out a scheduled job, but because of the container they had written and they'd shoved that WAR file into the container, the scheduled jobs would only show up inside that container. So all of a sudden, out of a 3-node cluster, one node would hit 99% utilization, and all the other machines were doing nothing because they leveraged the Java scheduler inside the app, not spinning it out as its own container to be able to level load against Kubernetes at the time. So think about that for a second, right? So they had 2 different schedulers, which is literally what Kubernetes is just a scheduler for pods. They weren't leveraging it because they were writing inside of Java. If they had spent the time to microservice out that scheduler part and those patch jobs, then they could have level loaded across that whole Kubernetes cluster, which would have utilized the product even better, right? Or the project even better, instead of having them spend hundreds of thousands of dollars of spinning up these massive Kubernetes clusters that only one node was actually doing the work. Does that make sense? Thumbs up? Did I lose everyone? Okay, cool. I know it's a little weird, and if I had a whiteboard, it'd be better, and if I didn't have 25 minutes, but you get the point. Isn't automation good here, right? Why is everything so complicated now, right? Like, it really is. Well, first of all, yes, right? Very much so. You need automation. There's so many moving parts in this world. You have to leverage automation to be successful. Computers if you leverage automation, computers will take away the human error-prone parts, which is really, really important because with all these different microservices, you need the automation to do the work. And then, honestly, yeah, your app has always been this complicated. It's just now we actually know it, right? Like, you're moving towards microservices. You don't have that, what was it, enterprise architect? Who has enterprise architects in the company? The one person that seems to know where all the bodies are buried on their apps? Yeah, this guy knows. This guy knows. He knows exactly what I'm talking about. That person no longer has that power because now you've just opened up the story to looking at all the different portions. So now you can actually scale, right? But yes, it is complicated. And yes, that EA is probably going to be really pissed that all of a sudden their job security is gone. But that also means your business can grow. Because isn't that the whole reason why we're doing this? Right? We're not doing this to like run Kubernetes clusters. Nobody makes money running Kubernetes. Well, IBM does, but that's a different conversation. Nobody actually makes real money running Kubernetes. They make money by running the app that makes their business successful, right? So it's better to have a scale problem with real people working inside of it. So a good friend of mine had this great comment, or when I went through this talk a long time ago, and he's like, JJ, who knows what a bull mastiff is? It's a really big dog. Who knows what a chihuahua is? Everybody knows what a chihuahua is. But this is exactly what we're doing. When we're moving from a monolithic app to a bunch of microservices, you had a bull mastiff, and now you got 13 yipping chihuahuas. And you've got to feed and care for all 13 fucking of them. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. But on that same level, I stole this quote from someone who stole this quote from someone who I stole this from Ken, a very good friend of mine. And this is more true than anything. We replaced our monolith with microservices, and every outage is now like a murder mystery. It's true, because if you do not have those shared contracts between the different microservices, the different logging systems you have, the different ways your application is done, when something goes pear-shaped, you're going to have to debug through that. And I'm an old sysadmin. I got gray in my beard. I was a DevOps professional for a very long time. I woke up at 3 in the fucking morning when the pager went off. Yes, I had a pager. And I would have to debug things at 3 in the morning. I could only imagine what it is, the equivalent of the SREs today, who when something goes pear-shaped for them, if they don't have those shared, trusted contracts between microservices, walking through this stuff must be a nightmare. So you have to sit there and build those trusted APIs that you know they are going back and forth. Again, that goes back to the original statement of you have to have that the coordination between teams. You have to understand that you have to work those ways, which is really important. So hopefully out of all this, you realize that it's not just a technological, I'm a professional speaker, technological problem. It's actually a cultural shift. Moving from the VM ecosystem to, or the monolith ecosystem to, or monolith systems to microservices, you end up building a real cultural shift. Who's all read the Phoenix Project? That is very surprising. Okay. There's an audiobook version of it, so you can, when you're working out in the morning or whatever, you can listen to it. If you are ever done ops work at all, it is triggering because we've all lived this life. But if you've never done ops work and you're just a developer, do yourself a favor and either listen to the audiobook or read the book called The Phoenix Project. It's basically Eliyahu Goldratt's version of The Goal that we all read in university, but with the IT kink. And it is an insanely powerful book that will tell you the story of how, if you leverage the correct way, or I should say cultural correct ways of communication, you can build so much powerful pipelines, which is one of the most important things, is you have to build that pipeline. We all use CI, right? Raise your hand. Okay, good. Everyone uses CD, right? You are all lying. Nobody actually uses CD, right? Like if you're doing continuous deployment, first of all, are you hiring? Because I really want to see that. But in all seriousness, like CD is great, but continuous delivery, that's scary, right? I get that. But at the same time, if you get to that point where you can trust the bots to do that work and have that level of pipeline, you'd be amazed at how many companies still don't do that, right? Still don't have CI to actually test stuff. And sometimes you have to build a massive infrastructure to do that testing too. Well, that's part of the job, right? So you need to work with that. I've talked about this already, but I'll reiterate. You have to learn to collaborate with other teams. One of the hardest things I saw with AsgharLabs is that the actual collaboration between teams were one of the biggest problems. They had some propaganda about, Scrum teams and tribes and shit like that. And people just kept wanting to do it the old way. Collaboration isn't just status meetings, right? It's more than that. It's being able to create those shared contracts for jobs and responsibilities. Jira tickets can only get you so far, but the ability to actually sit down and talk to someone. Like, there was one experiment that one of the companies that I wish I could talk about did that got really high up remarks, worked really well, which was that they had a bunch of microservices that they got through that point. But what they ended up doing is they ended up taking one person from each team and then shifting it to each one every sprint. This worked so well because now all of a sudden you had a brand new person for 2 weeks that you had to train on what that little microservice did, and they had to be able to be useful in those 2 weeks in that sprint. Now, the first couple times, it was bad, right? Like, it was just a bad experience for everybody because documentation always sucks. What do you mean I have to start installing Go? Like, there's things that are happening inside of this. But before you know it, after a handful of those cycles, all of a sudden somebody just slots themselves in, and then they're just working on the problem, not the language, right? They're actually engaging in it. And their velocity just skyrocketed, which was amazing. Now, I wouldn't be an ops nerd if I didn't talk about visibility and monitoring, because it's important. But you have to have something better than that single pane of glass. I know a bunch of companies sell single panes of glass out there for information, but you do need to understand that you need to have good visibility and monitoring, which is important. And getting close to the end here, because I realize I only have 3 minutes left. How do the economics of using cloud native differ than your data center? You need to have a real conversation with your CFO. As you start going down this path and trying to break up your application, there is real effects to the bottom line of your business with your OpEx and your CapEx. There's a lot of CFOs that appreciate the monolithic way of developing software because it's predictable, right? Cloud can go completely out of the cloud ecosystem can go completely off the rails really fast, which all of a sudden really hits your bottom line. So it's really important to talk about that. And finally, what do you mean all our support's in Stack Overflow now? It is, because most of the stuff in the cloud native ecosystem is in the open, right? It's all open source work. There's communities. You're going to have to come to events like this and have conversations with people like Chris over there, right? And really talk to him about how leveraging DO can make your life better. And I work for IBM. What am I saying there? There you go. I love you, Chris. But you got my point. So I have some tangible things, but unfortunately we're running out of time to talk about. But I want to leave you with this quote from a great friend of mine, Thomas Cape. You wouldn't use a saw when you needed a hammer, or you wouldn't use a hammer when you needed a saw, right? I mean, you look like an idiot if you're trying to saw a piece of wood with a hammer, or if you're trying to hammer and a nail with a saw, it would work. But you got to really go back to your bosses and ask, is it really worth going down that path to move to cloud native? If I've learned anything doing this job now for 10 years, talking about this, fuck, it really has been 10 years, talking about this stuff. So many companies just want to move to the cloud native space, but you want to make money. And it's real engineering time to migrate your monolith to microservices. So maybe just start in microservices if you're building that new app, because we're always coming out with a version 2 of our app, right? The answer is yes. Thank you so much. Please, if you can, take a picture of that QR code. That's how I proved that I actually had people watching this video, or this talk. Again, it's back to IBM Granite if you want to talk about that with a open source AI. By the way, the project I'm wearing called InstructLab is a workflow to train. One thing that YK was talking about was that knowledge gap inside of AIs, where it only knows up to a certain point. I have a free open source way supported by Red Hat called InstructLab. It is a workflow that actually gives you new knowledge to AI models. And with our Granite model as open source and free, you could actually have everything running on your laptop where you can give it specific knowledge for what you want, which is pretty freaking cool. Thank you again.